Like and follow if you love horror. This is book 3 in Hungry Cosmos called Another Day. Mama said there'd be days like this, there'd be days like this, Mama said. I remember my mama singing that song to punctuate truly shit days. Of course, having a bad day is putting it mildly when you're a nuke at an experimental nuclear engine facility for the damn military. Nuke being the military slang for nuclear engineer. Everything about civilian contracting for the military is a bad day. Not that the pay doesn't make it worth it, must admit that can't be beat. It's just all the damn inefficiency, red tape, and complications. So when you find a small plot of land near your secret military base that's filled with desiccated ashy gray plants and no one wants to talk about it, that's normal. I watched as my biological expert Sylvia broke off a sample of the dead plant specimen. Not that you could tell it was her until she spoke. All 4 of us were alien to each other in those damn squeaky yellow rubber hazmat gear. Looked like a bunch of alien invaders just dropped off for a morning stroll. Hi, Bailey. Do you think they're testing a pesticide? She asked. Not like they'd tell us, I replied, holding out my Geiger counter. It registered the usual ambient readings typical of within a mile of our base's reactor, higher than normal but harmless. Radiation levels are nominal. Well, if it's not nuclear, perhaps it's one of those damn grunts dropped something off they're not supposed to. Reggie put his 2 cents in, scooping bits of soil into a sample tube. Something's cleaned out the wildlife. All dead flora, no fauna, not even insects, nothing. Our environmental engineer, Casey, was the first to realize something was wrong. He already sounded spooked. Well, grab some dead things and throw them in a specimen jar, Reggie replied dismissively, missing the point. Nothing to sample, Casey responded. The only way we knew this finally snuck into Reggie's thick skull was when his whole body jerked completely around to look at Casey. What do you mean nothing to sample? He sounded annoyed, like Casey was being insubordinate. Not that Reggie was his boss. I was. There was an uncomfortable pause as everyone looked around at each other. It's funny that we would do something like that, look for facial cues when we couldn't see each other's faces clearly through the masks. Explain, I asked, breaking the silence. Casey sighed, annoyed that no one was getting it. He bent down and lifted up a large stone, flipping it over. No samples, no bugs, no little critters or creepy crawlies. Look. He flipped over another stone. Tunneling from ants? No ants. The webs of your typical wolf spider? No spider. Even weirder, no molts, no dead bugs caught in the web, no detritus. Hell, have you seen one damn bird, one damn bunny, a squirrel, a deer? Even just deer droppings. He gestured around him at the field of desiccation. It seemed to stretch on for quite a large tract of land. By our estimate, it was just shy of 4 acres, or about as long as 3 football fields, and slightly wider. The dead plant matter reached right up to the forest line, and even the fringes of the forest were dead and desiccated. It was like a wash of death had rolled over them and simply broke against the resistance of the large pines. This area, unimaginatively entitled the Gray Zone by military command, led right up to the edge of our facility. A few narrow trails of dead, gray grass, most of which had crumbled under its own weight, ran from the facility. However, the closer it drew to the forest, the bands of gray widened until many paths connected into long waves of skeletal gray. Then it all simply ended at the forest. One of the paths led right through the miles of barbed wire topped with chain link fence and right to a guard booth positioned outside the western gate of our facility. This trail had already piqued the suspicion of the brass, who believed it was a breach of protocol. Likely, they too assumed someone had dumped caustic chemicals in the field. The path from the guard's little red box might have been from dragging the substance in an inappropriately sealed container, and the other paths could have been from tracking the spilled substance out, or maybe from contaminating the contaminant spilling into little streams along the grass line. Had the contaminant been heavy enough gas, it could have caused the trails and effectively been held back by the forest until it dissipated. That all seemed reasonably plausible, only nothing we had access to was known to cause that kind of damage on such a wide scale, other than actual radioactive contamination. Had it been caustic enough to drive off all the wildlife and kill all the plant matter, it likely should have seemed obvious what was the cause. The fact that it had us all suspicious of our own military associates was disturbing. Hypothesis, Casey announced, breaking our ranks of confusion, gesturing and silly rubber breaking our ranks of confused gestures and silly yellow rubber suits. All right, I ran my heavily gloved fingers over the fronds of some fern. They shattered into dust and drifted in the still morning air. Fungal creep, he stated with a subtle nod. A fungus, possibly invasive, possibly made more damaging by our constant interference with the local environment, drives off all the animals and kill every plant it touches. Can't quite break the tree line because the bark is too thick. It could have been something grown as a byproduct of a mutation on the base and carried out in the boots of some dumb grunt, meaning it didn't even have to be intentional. Viral, Reggie retorted as he thought he needed to counter with something. If it was fungal, there would be evidence at the edges of the zone. Thought I was the expert here, but he loved giving Reggie a hard time. It's a solid point. I'm going to check the edges of the zone to see if I can find any living specimens. Casey departed, his hazmat suit squeaking awkwardly. All right, we don't get paid by the hour, and I don't want to be out here all day. More hypothesis, I asked, examining the remnants of a plant dust on my gloves. Well, if the contaminant was brought out of the facility through the west gate, we might want to start by seeing who was on shift and what they had access to, Sylvia spoke up. We already went over the reports from the guard post, I shook my head, though it must have been barely registered as my head turning inside the clunky suit. If the breach was intentional, they're not talking. If the breach was an accident, as KC suggested, the soldiers posted here are all scattered about the base and likely don't know what to look for. We'll have to figure out the contaminant and retrace it to its source. Unless we don't have clearance, in which case it stays another one of life's mysteries, Reggie grumbled. Not our problem, I retorted. Then we figure out what it wasn't, and if we're not allowed to audit the holdings secured by the military, they'll do it internally and figure it out them damn selves. To be blunt, I just didn't want to be in that damn suit anymore. I didn't much care for the job I was getting paid to intentionally do poorly by our employers. Much as Reggie's attitude about it gave me a headache, he was right. Our position was always to eliminate the sources we were cleared for. After that, it would be pretty obvious to the brass if it was a source only they were privy to. Then it all got wrapped up, and a couple weeks later, a new protocol was handed down to us without telling us why or what we were trying to avoid. That's when we heard the scream. Sounded like someone was being murdered. Incidentally, it was coming from the west gate, where we were heading anyways. When we arrived, we discovered a young member of the security detail holding his hand as it trickled blood. A dead rodent lay at his feet, blood smearing his standard issue boots and silly fractile green fatigues. Jesus Christ, Corporal, it hardly broke the skin. Wrap it up and go to medical. The gate sergeant shook his head, scolding the young soldier. He kicked the rat corpse off to the side. Hold up, I said, retrieving a specimen bag. Reggie, bag the rat. What? He knew what I meant and knew it was standard procedure. He just didn't want to and gave the only answer, suggesting the order was silly. Bag the damn rat, I repeated. Christ's sake, he grumbled, retrieving the corpse with a specimen collector. Sergeant Nunez, I addressed the gate sergeant directly. He was a stern man, simple and of few words, but not as confrontational as many of the other NCOs. I'd like to request boot swabs from every member of security staff from the last 3 days. 3 days? The gray zone appeared last night. He managed the stone-faced look well, as was typical of his station, but his light blue eyes and chubby baby cheeks always detracted from this